Is WVVA in Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your co-host this morning, Martin Staunton.
And I'm Melinda Zosh. This morning we're talking about racial tensions in America. It's been more than a week since George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota in broad daylight, and that was captured on video. We have two guests joining us this morning and one later on, but I want to introduce our first two guests, Dr. Kristi Dumas with Dumas Psychology Collective in Beckley, and also Robert Dunlap, an attorney in Beckley. So thank you both so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
So last Sunday, there was a peaceful vigil in Beckley. Can you all share a little bit about that? And we have some video we'd like to share with our videos as well. What was the purpose of that vigil, and what do you hope people took away from that?
Well, we felt like so many people felt helpless. We felt like we had to do something so that the community had a way to express itself in a conducive way. And frankly, we have a large African-American community in Beckley, and they need the ability, just like all of us need the ability, to express ourselves when you see this type of a travesty, this type of a taking of a human life. And Dr. Dumas and I are professional colleagues, and we just called one another and started what I thought would be a really tough conversation because, I was having a completely different set of emotions, I imagine, than she was having, and we discovered there was a lot of commonality in what we felt. And then we both were just drawn to action, Dr. Dumas.
Yes, we wanted people to be able to come together in solidarity, to really be able to understand that they weren't experiencing the hurt and the anger and the frustration alone, that it wasn't in a vacuum, that other people felt just as strongly about what has been going on across the country. And ironically, we started planning this well before the riots and some of the other protests that happened. We really wanted a constructive way to get people together and start the difficult conversation of race and reconciliation in our community.
Can you talk, if you will, because you said this has unfolded across the country, but in reality, it's unfolded around the world. But it strikes me that in all of these places where we have seen violence accompany some of the protests, how were you able to avoid that in the Beckley gathering?
Well, I think one of the things that was really important that Attorney Dunlap and I thought, we have to be able to have this conversation. People need to be heard. Martin Luther King certainly said that riots are the language of the unheard. And so we wanted to get in front of that and give people the opportunity to be heard, to be represented, and to feel like they have a voice in what is going on. So I think because we were willing to, from the start, give people a place to feel heard, I think that is why we were able to contain some of the other violent behavior that you have seen in other places. Thoughts about that?
Well, it's true, and it's my problem with a lot of the folks in my demographic is they want to demonize the looting and the rioting, but yet whenever an NFL player wants to express himself in peaceful and silent protest, we want to demonize that young man. We want at the top levels of our political system to say, I'm not going to repeat what our president called Mr. Kaepernick, but and those individuals that took that approach. But what do you expect if you can't listen to another human being when they're under this level of pain and distress? So no, I don't think the rioting and the looting is the problem. The problem is people aren't opening their hearts and listening to other individuals as they're suffering. So I'm glad that I know a professional like Dr. Dumas, who is already fantastic at helping work with people that go through psychological trauma. I knew I was calling the right number, and we made sure. And here's the thing, if you're going to have this type of an event, have folks put it together that understand you need masks there. You need to enforce social distancing. Bishop, who spoke at this service, he said, don't let me rebuke you in the name of the Lord for acting up during this event. We had smart people there, and what came afterward? City of Beckley mayor, Chief of Police Lonnie Christian. We had the top levels of government say, let's write a statement condemning these activities. And people felt that. They felt that their government supported them.
And I think that's what people wanted to hear. That's what people needed to hear, was that this is not going to happen here. That we are absolutely not condoning this type of policing and this type of behavior. And I think that's what people came for. They needed that reassurance.
And it's a shame. It's a shame because it really feels like what America is waiting for is for this just to go away. Let's just get over this part so we can go back to the way things should be and the way things are.
Well, can we talk about also the idea that as terrible as what happened to George Floyd is at the hands of a police officer, it comes on the heels of that really disturbing video where two citizens shot a guy to death jogging through their neighborhood, and they were not police officers. How do you think that primed what's happened since George Floyd's death?
I think what people are seeing now, which is something that I'll be talking about this weekend at another gathering and another march, is I think what people are feeling is a whole paradigm shift, where now we are saying it's not enough to just not be racist. It's not enough to say, I don't see color. There is a whole paradigm shift that is happening in our society where young people are calling for us to be anti-racist. And so that is what I am proclaiming, is that people also need to be able to stand up and to say, this is not okay. It's not enough to not condone how other people act, but you need to be able to call them out on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so for years and years, this has been happening. The Arbery case is not new. Floyd's case is not new. This is an old pain for African American people, and now it's being televised. Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone is an investigative reporter at this point, and so these things are old. It's not new, and I think that people in this day and time are willing to say enough is enough.
So let's talk more about that history and the root of this problem, really. As you mentioned, Dr. Dumas, this is an old problem dating back to even before the Jim Crow laws. So can you talk a little bit about systemic racism, and maybe Mr. Dunlap, you can touch a little bit on redlining and how people were separated and how generations back of unfairness, if I could use that word, has led to maybe where we are now.
Well, certainly, but it's funny when you start talking about systemic racism, you start talking about the machines that we've put in place, well-oiled machines that keep an entire group of people down for 400 years. I mean, that's a long, long conversation, and it's a difficult one for Caucasian folks to have because black folks aren't the ones behind that. We're not the ones that set up systems that would fund housing and extend loans to certain people and not others, creating communities that were almost exclusively African American, and then making sure we eliminated other folks from being able to get financing for homes, which caused certain communities, homes to depreciate, et cetera. And again, I know you're referencing just some of the tough conversations we have to have, but here's the conversation that inspired me so much. Dr. Dumas is talking to me about what it means to raise a son in southern West Virginia, as we're both doing that now with a son that is within the same age limit. She has to teach her son an entirely different set of protocols for how he must behave to be able to come home to her at night safely. And that's a travesty. Can you imagine if we all had to, and when I'm saying we, I'm talking about Caucasian Americans, if we had to sit down and fear that our boys, when we send them out into the world, might not come home because their lives might be snuffed out by hate in 2020, how have we not started getting past the pigment of our skin devaluing someone's life? And how difficult is it to open up your heart and try to understand another people, another culture? Sure, we're different.
Sure.
And I see Dr. Dumas's color, and she sees my color. We can't get away from that. It's part of who we are. But we have missed an opportunity, and frankly, I think there's going to be a reckoning in the afterlife. Your Lord and Savior wants you to understand all of his creatures, all of his people, and for you to systemically keep that hate in your heart and just not want to talk about it, just not want to have to address it.
Sure.
That's a missed opportunity on every level.
I think Al Sharpton said it very poignantly during the memorial for George Floyd. And he said very clearly, just take your foot off of our necks so that we can try again to even the playing field. And I think about those societies and those communities that were predominantly African American that were built up. I think about Tulsa and the Black Wall Street. I think about Rosewood. I think about those areas and those space and time where Black people were getting ahead. They were evening the playing field, and then those places were destroyed very purposely by the government. So I think it is very important for us to understand the history of the systemic racism. And I think you pointed it out very well, that it is a system that has been set up to not give people equal opportunity. And so we have to be cognizant of that as we move forward and try to change some of the ways that we engage with each other, lending and education. There are a lot of ways that we can make some good ground here so that we can strive more closely to that American dream and that goal.
All right, we have to take a quick break, but we have much more to talk about, including the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of people are sharing this All Lives Movement hashtag on Facebook too, so I want to talk to Mr. Dunlap and Ms. Dumas more about that as well. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Good morning and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. You just saw a video from a peaceful vigil that happened in Beckley just about a week or so ago. I'm Melinda Zosh, joining you once again with my co-anchor Martin Staunton.
Yes, and we're here talking about a very difficult topic, race relations in the wake of all the protests and the violence that we've seen following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We were talking about being at a crossroads, and the division seems to be right at the crux of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's an All Lives Matter movement. Our guests today, Dr. Dumas and Mr. Dunlap, helped organize that Beckley protest, but we were talking about that. Mr. Dunlap, your thoughts? All Lives Matter.
You know, All Lives Matter, it's a little hard for me to understand their focus. It's like they showed up to a walk for cancer, a Susan Komen walk, and they said, you know what, we're here, and all diseases matter. You know, they're missing the point. The point is, Black Lives Matter, that movement started because this was something that we just wanted, like the next school shooting. Can we just get to the next school shooting and let's not have to think about it until we can spend half a beat saying, oh, this was terrible, now move on. We don't want to just acknowledge something's happened. We want it to stop happening. And I don't know when Caucasian folks get this, but someone else getting equality, whether they're LGBTQ, whether they're African American, that doesn't mean you're losing something. Your rights aren't depreciating because someone else is becoming equal. That is as a white man, is something humiliating to me, that we continue to not understand. Somehow I'm losing because things are becoming all equal. Maybe you don't believe in Barack and Michelle's maxims of there's enough room at the top for everybody, fine. But enough of holding other people down so you feel better about yourself, that's weakness.
Absolutely. I heard someone give the analogy that it's almost like a whole community of houses, and one house is on fire. But when the police and the fire department show up, you want them to spray down all of the houses in the area, even though only one house is on fire. So spray down and wet down all of the houses. That is really analogous with the All Lives Matter hashtag. Yes, all of the homes in that community are important, but there's one house that is actually on fire. And so we need the firemen to put that fire out. It does not take away from the value or the importance of any other houses in the neighborhood. And so when I hear All Lives Matter, I hear people saying, wet my house down even though it's not ablaze. And so what we really have to do in our communities, we have to focus our attention on those who are ablaze right now and put that fire out so that all of the people in the community can rise together.
And our time, I hate to jump in here, our time is running down, but I have to ask the question before we go to break again. How do we get past the idea that, some African Americans blame all white people for the past? How do we move beyond that? I've heard the argument many times that I never owned slaves.
Yep.
Why are you mad at me? Can you address that?
Well, let me say very quickly that I think that we do hear that all the time. And what we have to do is go back to something that I said earlier, is you have to get past absolving yourself of any wrongdoing because you didn't own slaves, or because you have a black friend, or because you work with a black person. It's more than that now. It's not, I'm not racist, it's I'm anti-racist. It's taking a stand against some of the systemic injustices that you see happen every day when nobody is around, when no one is there to ask you to advocate for them. Are you able and willing to do it of your own free will and volition?
And I want to jump in here quickly. We have probably less than 2 minutes left in this segment, but I call it whataboutism. So people on Facebook are saying, what about black on black crime? So it seems like a deflection away from the real issue here.
Absolutely.
Can either of you address that?
Well, sure, because, and I've read those same posts, ultimately, black on black crime they aren't being targeted for their blackness. A person didn't wake up this morning and say, you know what, I'm African American, and there are just too damn many of us. I'm going to go after one of my persons that shares my skin tone, and I'm going to snuff out their life. That's not the hatred we're talking about. And sure, there are always going to be great police officers. There's always going to be people who are in the middle of committing crimes that are apprehended. I'm a criminal attorney. I see so many good officers, and I see so many folks that are engaged in criminal activity, but I don't think initially that they're motivated because of their ethnicity. I don't think whenever you're talking about a crime motivated against a person that it is because of their race, like what we're trying to address and what we're trying to stop happening, and that is hurting others because of their ethnicity.
Any concluding thoughts moving forward? How do we move forward from here when it seems like we're so divided in this country?
I think what it's going to take ultimately is some great leadership from the national level all the way down to the local level, and people in position who are committed to change, who are committed to diversity, and who are committed to inclusion, and being okay with saying what we have in place is not working, and we are willing to move forward and make something better for everyone.
All right, we've run out of time in this segment, but again, I want to thank our guests, Robert Dunlap, Beckley attorney, and Dr. Kristi Dumas, psychologist in Beckley, for coming in. And coming up, we have another guest, Bishop Fred Brown. He's with the Faith Center Church in Bluefield, West Virginia. He'll be sharing his thoughts on the current state of America. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Good morning and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. I'm Melinda Zosh, joined with my co-anchor once again, Martin Staunton. We're joining you from our studio in Bluefield, West Virginia. Martin, we've been talking all about racial relations here in America and here at the local level as well this morning.
We certainly have, and as our guest, as we continue this discussion, is Bishop Brown from Bluefield. And Bishop, I just want to jump right back into this and ask, just this week, West Virginia's governor said that the first African-American president in the history of this country is not welcome in West Virginia. Everybody else is welcome, but not him. Even though he's backpedaled off of that statement, do you think this has harmed race relations in the Mountain State?
I think it absolutely harms our race relations. Of course, we know our nation as a whole is in a tremendous racial crisis right now, something that I don't think we've seen since the 60s. in terms of its impact of what we're experiencing right now. And for the governor of the state of West Virginia to come and make a statement like that is very, very challenging, and it's very hard for us to accept and to deal with at this point.
Let me ask, what are you hearing in terms of feedback from your parishioners and people in the community about that, especially now since there's been a couple of days and he's, for the most part, apologized for saying that?
I think most people would be willing to accept an apology, but we also are mindful that just a few months ago, this is the same governor that during a girls' basketball game made a statement in terms of referencing the Woodrow Wilson High School girls' basketball team as thugs. That's a very challenging statement within itself, and now here we are a few months later, and now we're saying that the 44th President of the United States is not welcome here in the state of West Virginia. And so, again, we know he's backpedaling and doing everything he can to try to bring clarity to the statement that he made. But nevertheless, it is something, even within my parishioners and the mindsets of people, it's very tough to accept.
So Bishop, how do we overcome this type of division, especially when we're hearing things like this coming from our leaders, and then we're seeing people, echo that, whether it be to their neighbors or even sharing those types of sentiments that are coming from the leaders, and then they're sharing that on social media and that message gets spread. How do we overcome this division?
I think number one, we have to have the hard conversations. We really have to sit down as a people, not just black, not just white, but we have to sit down as humans, and we have to have the hard conversations to where we can really put these things out on the table and really deal with them for what they really are. And it's all about conversation. And then once we get through the conversation stage, I think the next thing is we must rally together and we must start putting pressure on systemic racism that we're dealing with, not only in the nation, but even here locally, things that we've dealt with down through the years. I always like to say that, when you look at the percentages of people, African Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, and whites will make up roughly 72%. Those numbers are a little flexible, roughly 72%. So it can't be a thing where black people are the only people that's speaking out and giving voices of concern concerning racism. We need the assistance of the 72% to understand that, we're just asking to be human. We're just asking for our rights like everyone else.
What do you say to those people, especially when you bring up the topic of, or when the topic of white privilege comes up, and there are so many people who think that's a myth, that they're white, they don't see those privileges. What's your response to that?
I think we have to understand what white privilege actually means. White privilege doesn't mean that people have not had struggles. It doesn't mean that white people haven't had challenges, or white people haven't had the same issues of life that everyone else has had. It just simply means that their issues and their problems and their struggles is not a direct result of their skin color like it is for many African Americans. And so white privilege is something that is a reality, whether we want to accept it or not. Once again, it doesn't mean that you don't have challenges or struggles. It just means that your challenges and struggles are not a direct result of your skin color like it is for many other nationalities of people.
And to follow up with what Martin just asked you, Bishop, what do you say to those people who say all lives matter in response to the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think we all understand and agree that all lives matter. But what we are concerned with is making sure that black is included in the all. And I think that's the real issue. It's not that blacks don't believe that all lives matter. We just want to make sure that in the minds of everyone, and especially right now in the minds of the 72%, that black is included in the all. And that's the major issue that we're dealing with. We're not people that are just trying to act like that blacks should have any special privileges. We just want to make sure that when we say all lives matter, that black is included. And so when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not isolating ourselves and saying only Black Lives Matter. We're just simply saying we should be included in the all.
We were talking off camera, and you told me that you've got a son who's finishing up in college. As the father of a young African-American male in this country, how much worry is on your heart for your son?
Well, of course, when you see the situations with police brutality and racial profiling and all those things, of course, it is something that always sticks in the back of my mind in terms of having an athletic 22-year-old son that has just graduated from college, and now he's getting out here in the world and in the real world and getting into the workforce and doing multiple things. It's a challenge because, again, these things are reality in our nation. I don't care how we twist it, I don't care how we turn it. The things that we're dealing with in terms of the racial profiling and police brutality, it is disproportionately against African Americans. And this is something that is going to have to be corrected. And once again, even in that system, we're going to have to start putting pressure on the system.
And Bishop, we have just under a minute left in the show, but any concluding thoughts on racial relations in America? How do we overcome this?
I really believe we can overcome it. And I think a lot of it, again, comes down to the hard conversations. It comes down to us just wanting to be educated upon our various positions as humans and as people. Our cultures are different. We have been raised in different atmospheres. And so it's important for us to sit down and to learn without being judgmental, without, just taking offense to conversation. And that's one of the things, of course, I'm heavily involved in social media, and one of the things that's challenged me so far is just watching how people take offense to everything.
Right, and that's the key, to be open-minded. Bishop Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
From all
you.
of us here at WVVA, we hope you have a great day, and we will continue this conversation.
Thank you.